have a Mualani rerun ongoing, and naturally the big question is, should you get her? No. Mualani is best described as an on-field vape DPS character, and in this role, she is very, very strong. She's best known for having some of the most serotonin gameplay pretty much in the game, and in Spiral Abyss she's typically used around about maybe 10% of the time for the most part, which for reference is apparently a B ranking, if that's something that you care about, and there's quite a few characters who can in fact support her massive damage. Those who have been watching this series long enough, you would know that I am generally speaking offering my perspectives based on my experience of these characters, how much I play them, how much I want to play them. I don't really find myself ever wanting to play Mualani. Obviously, this is her first rerun since her release at the very start of Natlan, so I can say with great confidence that during the entirety of Natlan, the most I've actually ever played of Mualani is right now for this video. A week ago, because the damn turtle as Stygian Onslaught was way too cringe for me to beat in any other way, and of course the first 2 weeks since her release, basically at the start of Natlan. So basically, throughout the entirety of the Natlan duration, I've actually barely played her, especially compared to other characters that I have gone out of my way to get during this cycle. Not because I don't have any time for her. Oh, I have plenty of time for all the characters in the game that I actually like to play. Older characters like Lisa, Clorinde, Tegnati, Miko, Father even. I have plenty of time for them. But it's kind of like I don't really ever find myself wanting to play Mualani, okay? With Notcry just around the corner, wanting to introduce us to a bunch of new folks who have probably some really interesting mechanics incoming, as well as, of course, the pseudo new reactions maybe, I'm really struggling to figure out a reason why anyone should potentially get her. Aside from the usual, I really like Mualani and I desperately want to get her crowd, in which case, sure, absolutely. If you like her that much, 100% go for her, okay? She's still pretty fun to play, you know, when you actually play her. But if you are even remotely hesitant, yeah, I'd say save those primos for non-cry. Why don't you play Mualani, Kate? You may be asking. Now, I don't have a particularly strong answer to that question, honestly, but it may just be simply that I like my gameplay to have maybe a bit more action in the grand scheme of things. If you look at my top 10 most fun characters video that I've just put out a few days ago as of recording, who do I rank highly? Mainly a lot of characters who do quite a lot of things. Mualani kind of doesn't do that. Her core gameplay is kind of the following. You can set up her team, then you just ride through enemies with her shark. You might want to do that 3 times, hit 3 enemies or hit 1 enemy 3 times or a combination. Then you do a great big shark bite that does a lot of damage and hopefully forward vapes. You can also get some extra attacks from that shark bite that also hit other enemies and hopefully forward vape and do massive amounts of damage. And then of course, on top of that, you could potentially use her ult that also does massive amounts of damage, preferably hopefully forward vaping. Also keep in mind with those extra attacks that I just mentioned, there is this mechanic where if you mark more enemies, you can end up doing more total damage, but the serotonin value of it is a little bit less in that the individual damage is going to be lesser depending on how many more enemies you decide to mark. So when you are playing her, I'd say that the vast majority of her uptime is actually just surfing through people. You're not necessarily biting them, smacking them, shooting them or anything, but just setting them up with the majority of her uptime to do that great big serotonin damage. So whilst her massive screenshotable hits are amazing and impressive and very enjoyable, who doesn't love seeing 600,000 damage? At the end of the day, it just doesn't seem like she's my kind of DPS character. That being said though, there are some things that I do like about her I just want to point out. I think she's got a wonderful personality. I think she's got a really wonderful and permanently joyous smile on her face, which also means that when she is actually angry and or sad, that's when you know shit's about to hit the fan. She's also really cute. I mean, come on, just look at her. Let's be objective here for a second. Yeah, she's really cute. And then on top of that, you know, when it comes to exploration in Natlan, her ability to use a lot less phlogiston for surfing potential is really, really good. So she does actually offer that amount of exploration, which I kind of do like. Now for the rest of the video, it's really going to be for those who still want to get her anyway and are wondering how to build her. So if you found my perspective interesting and or helpful, don't forget to like the video. And feel free to subscribe because of course Notcry is just around the corner, so I'll be streaming and making videos about what comes out and all that good stuff. So if you hit that bell icon, you can be notified of the latest videos when they drop. Now, let's start off with what's new for Mualani. Basically, in the entire Natlan cycle, we have everyone from that Natlan cycle who is new, but I'll just highlight the characters who are particularly useful for her, the ones that matter. So first off, let's start off with Xilonen and of course to a lesser extent Kachina. They can of course provide some pretty sizable buffs for Mualani. Xilonen of course is actually needed if you want to max out Mualani's A4 passive, if her ult damage is actually something you care about. For a lot of people, that may not be the case. Kinich can also exist as like some sort of scuffed Emily if you decide to play full ER Kinich, I guess, and have How do all the damage. Autoron and Ineffa can be used in Mualani teams for some sort of weird Lunar charge comps if you're, I guess, bored of playing Forward Vape Mualani, which is the normal gameplay. Let's just be real here. Mavuika, of course, being the most reliable off-field pyro character for her. That being said, though, she's not the only character who is available for these kind of Forward Vape setups. PMC is absolutely perfectly fine and works pretty well. Oh, by the way, I would probably recommend tap skill over hold skill for PMC. It's just the way that Mualani works. I probably would stick with tap skill. You may be able to use Sitlali in these kinds of teams, but I'm not entirely sure about that. Let me know in the comments if you've been able to make that work. I'm kind of thinking the rotation would be something like, I don't know, set up your other character, then Sitlali into Mavuika into Mualani, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, moving on, we also have Lanyan, who can at least be a shielder that can do some VVing. I guess that can be useful. Skirk and Escoffier free setups with Mualani also exist, but they are like some sort of incredibly desperate need for Mualani. Otherwise, you know, Yalan is a lot better in this slot at this particular moment in time. Then we also have Dahlia, who does provide some normal attack speed, but I want to bring her up, or him up actually, mainly to say that even though Sharky Bite's considered as normal attack damage, normal attack speed doesn't do anything for them. So Dahlia is actually worthless here. And then there's also Iansan in Mualani teams. It's a little bit tricky. I will talk about that a little bit later. So when it comes to the teams that you're going to be playing with Mualani, you're getting Mualani, right? Which means you're probably going to want to play Mualani as a DPS because you're spending all this Prima Gems on her. You're going to be playing Forward Vape. That's basically what her entire kit is set up to do. So we have things like the BurnVape option where you make enemies burn and then you vape with Mualani. So the core of this team is basically having Mualani, a defensive character, a Dendro character, off-fielder preferably, and of course a Pyro off-fielder. So your defensive options include Xilonen, Baiju, Yao Yao as just another way of having Dendro potentially. C60 Owner actually works as well. Her cryo is so unfathomably crap that she will never kill the burning aura, it seems. So C60 Owner is actually an option. And then of course there's also Medic Mona, who is going to be a lot more trickier to use because you actually don't want to use her skill, otherwise her skill will steal your vapes, which is not what you want to do. The Dendro off-fielder options include Nahida, who is very strong in that she provides a lot of buffs for Mualani, specifically EM buffs, but ultimately you could potentially choose someone like Emily instead, who will just simply do a lot more damage than Nahida ever will in a team like this. Otherwise, there's also C4 Kirara, but kind of would prefer her in a double Dendro team at that point. Her own Dendro doesn't seem to be enough. And then of course there's also Kole. Kole surprisingly seems to work in making the team function at the very least. Obviously she's not going to be doing as much damage as Emily, but she is at least setting up the burning to actually function, so something to consider if you are a little bit on the desperate side. When it comes to the Pyro off-fielders, Mavuika is obviously going to be the go-to, but I do want to mention that the Hai and Xin Yan are actually pretty good, and like I mentioned, PMC, specifically tap skill PMC, is actually pretty decent as well. With Mavuika, I just want to mention, you probably want to be using skill into burst, simply so that you don't run into a bit of second rotation memes by accident when you're done with Mualani, but you want to still do some, you know, underlying hydro to start getting some buffs from whoever else you're playing, let's say Xilonen. And also, stop using Xiangling in Mualani teams, please. Okay? Here's the thing. Xiangling's Pyro app is incredibly powerful, but in a Mualani team, it's beyond overkill. On top of that, Xiangling's not vaping anything. So the fact that she can vape with no ICD is completely thrown out the window. And then on top of that, look, what are you going to do? Play Bennett in a Mualani team? No, you're not, okay? So Xiangling needs 3000 ER in order to be able to ult every rotation, or you're going to be ulting every once, maybe every other rotation, in which case the rotations where you're not ulting, you're going to have to rely on Guoba. Good luck with that, okay? Listen, PMC is free, and PMC does the job just as well, actually. So stop playing Xiangling in Mualani teams and use Xiangling somewhere else. Now, the other option that's not BurnVape, obviously, is just straight vape. Just good old-fashioned vaping. So, the core of this team is probably going to be Mualani, a defensive character, preferably a buffer, and then, of course, a pyro character. So, your pyro characters, of course, is going to be the same as the BurnVape team. But your defensive options can be Xilonen, Xilonen. Considering that you're not taking necessarily burning damage, you may want to consider a shielder instead, in which case, Zhongli. You have a lot of options available. Xinyan, again, same idea. Your buffers, on the other hand, are probably going to be Sucrose, who I would argue is the best overall. Kazuha can be a little bit finicky. You can make him work, sort of, but I wouldn't really recommend it. You can, of course, still use a Pyro-infused Kazuha ult, for example, which can be useful, particularly if you have a C2. Otherwise, I kind of would steer clear of him for the most part. Or you have a Iansan. Okay, let me explain what the dealio is with Iansan. I am specifically referring to C6 Iansan. C6 Iansan is plus 25% damage percent. Okay, cool. So, the thing about Iansan is that, obviously, because Mualani moves a lot and also drains her own Night Soul, Mualani can actually maintain Iansan's Night Soul meter very, very easily, which means we're overcapping that Night Soul meter, which means we're getting that C6 buff from Iansan. Now, let's compare C6 Iansan versus Sucrose with, let's say, Mizuki's weapon on Mualani. In my experience, if I were to build Mualani for the Sucrose team, well, the huge EM that we're getting from Sucrose is going to give me 490k massive hits with my Mualani, which is really, really good. The problem is that's only going to last for 8 seconds max. And depending on when I use Sucrose, if I want to try and get a VV buff, it actually means that my EM share is lasting for 6 seconds, roughly, which is like 1 Sharky Bite, 2 if I'm lucky, which is kind of crap. Iansan, on the other hand, obviously, we're not going to be seeing as big of a hit as we're going to be seeing with Sucrose, but it's still 365k with that C6 buff. And that's a buff that lasts a long-ass time. So I can at least do maybe 3 Sharky Bites with all of that damage. Basically, I did the math. It kind of comes out to not be that different. So I just want to say, if you happen to have C6 Iansan and you don't want to deal with Sucrose memes, it's an option. Also, Iansan will buff your non-reacting Mavuika ult a lot better than Sucrose ever will. I'm just saying, okay? At the end of the day, it seems like Sucrose is a bit better for your overall DPS. Definitely a lot better for that peak serotonin hits. But, you know, let's not discount Iansan's uptime, which does make her seemingly something that may be competitive. Because that all leads us to something that I would like to call the Natlan Inquisition. A legitimate team made up in the same vein as the Raiden Inquisition, which was an Oops or Inazuma team. We now have an Oops or Natlan team. Mualani, Xilonen, Iansan, Mavuika. It actually works pretty damn well. There's also Lunar Charge teams, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, that you can play if you feel like it. And once again, she can be a scroll user for your super duper desperate Skirk teams. I would not recommend it myself, but it's an option. Now, when it comes to building Mualani, she's actually pretty straightforward. Let's just get artifacts right out of the way. Obsidian Codex, that's it, no exceptions. If you're still trying to farm an Obsidian set because, let's say, you're brand new to the game, then yeah, sure, 2-piece Hydro, 2-piece HP, or 2-piece Hydro, 2-piece Hydro can be a perfectly solid option for the time being. Otherwise, if you're a desperate Skirk player, then the idea is to run Scroll on Mualani. It doesn't really matter how you build her. Although, you should probably try and build a Scroll build for Mualani anyway to do as much DPS, because her ult can still be useful for some DPS in that regard. Anyway, for the artifact stats, 99% of the time, you are going for HP Hydro Crit. That being said though, if you're playing with Sucrose, an HP Sand is particularly good because you're going to get a lot of EM from Sucrose. An HP cup can potentially be particularly good if you have a lot of damage percent in the team. For example, that Natlan Inquisition team that I just mentioned, yeah. HP cup is a little bit better than Hydro cup, it seems. Perhaps with some weapons, it's entirely possible to do more damage with an HP hat as well. Kind of the same way that it works for someone like Neuvillette. So, you know, if you do get a particularly good HP hat, don't throw it away. Give it a try. See how you go. Use it against your test dummy of choice. For substats, you're pretty much aiming for as much crit and HP as you can. Any additional ER is appreciated because her ult can do a lot of damage, but apparently it only accounts for like 30% of her total damage per rotation, so don't go out of your way to get ER. But if you want that extra serotonin, her ult is actually pretty strong. Speaking of weapons, let's talk about weapons. So, Surf's Up is her signature weapon. It's going to be her best in slot, but depending on who you ask, it's not even necessarily better than some of the options. I believe it's still supposed to be her best in slot, but the thing is, Widsith exists. And depending on the buff you get from Widsith, it can potentially outperform Surf's Up, at least on a serotonin level. So if you get the damage percent on the EM buff, no matter who's on your team, Mualani is going to be doing a lot of damage. So there we go. The problem is it only lasts for 10 seconds, and there's a 30-second cooldown. Standard Widsith means this also means that you're only getting a buff once every other rotation, which kinda sucks. And if you get the attack buff, you're doubly cooked. Jade on Mualani is apparently incredibly strong on paper. The problem is, for the most part, you're going to have to build an oops, no crit rate build in order for the weapon to not actually severely overcap in crit rate. Mualani alone ascends with crit rate. She already gets up to 24.2% at level 90. There's another 40 from Obsidian, and then Jade is 36.8. This all totals up to 101 crit rate without any substats, which means, yeah, it's going to be hard to get together a build. Not impossible, though, because this was kind of the case with, let's say, Clorinde, and I was able to get together a pretty decent Clorinde build that had almost no crit rate. Maybe you can do that with Mualani. So I guess this may actually also be the rare moment where maybe 2-piece Hydro might be a better course of action. Maybe. Just depends on your luck, really. Otherwise, there's also the Ring of the Yaxche, which is actually the Natlan craftable. I am almost certain I have mispronounced the name. It is actually very strong. Now, when the Widsith is not giving you any buffs, or the attack buff, the Natlan craftable is actually better, which is kind of crazy. Widsith, when it's buffing you, is of course going to be stronger. By my estimation, around about 25% stronger during that 10-second duration. But the Widsith also buffs the ult. Ring of Yaxche doesn't buff the ult at all. So the ult under the buff, in my experience, seems to be around about 50% stronger with Widsith. So just keep that in mind, okay? Otherwise, EM statistics are fine. HP statistics, specifically Ring of Yaxche, is fine. Lifeguard Mualani is also okay. Not going to be as much damage as Ring of Yaxche, but I guess if you, for whatever reason, need the healing, there we go. And finally, there's Mualani's Constellations, which honestly, I have not given an iota of thought whatsoever prior to writing this video. So, no. Just like every other Natlan DPS in particular, I don't think you need any of her Constellations for her to be particularly strong. So, just by leveling her to level 90 and building her artifacts, that seems to do the trick. But if you want to clear Dire Plus, I guess you're going to need some of her Constellations. Let's have a look at them. C1 is additional HP scaling on the first Shark Bite, plus what seems to be the standard Exploration Phlogiston efficiency buff. By my understanding, C2 is a faster maximum power Shark attack, and also some longer uptime for her skill. Maybe in that case, you may want to go burst as a skill with Mavuika instead. With C4, it's some energy, but also some more ult damage, which potentially makes it unironically a bit better than most C4s in the game. And then of course C6 is basically C1, but with no restriction whatsoever. It's for all the Shark Bites, not just the first one. Definitely it's going to be a huge power spike for your damage overall, but probably not as much of a psychological boost, considering that you've already been seeing the gigantic number coming from that C1 for presumably a long time, unless you've gone all in for C6 Mualani, in which case that's a little bit different. All of this to say, my Mualani is a C0 Mualani, hovering between Widsith and Yaxche, and she seems absolutely perfectly fine in the grand scheme of things. I did need to level her up to level 90 in order to be able to clap that Stygian Tortoise though, so I guess if anything, the difference between level 90 and level 80 Mualani, and also level 9 versus level 8 skill, is probably the bigger difference in the grand scheme of things. Let me just think about all of this in the comments below. What's your favorite Mualani team? If I got something wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments as well. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Not even have the courage to be afraid. Is it my turn? Now that's more like it. With the fog of darkness, destruction shall rise. Might have a taste of purgatory.
Hey, come on now.
Bring it. Any brave names I go. Look at me. Trapped like a bunch of helpless ants.
Pyroclastic surge!
With these rising flames,